The first scream of delight pierced the sweltering August air at exactly 2:47 p.m., followed by a spectacular splash that sent water cascading over the edge of what had to be the most ingenious backyard transformation Maple Street had ever witnessed. Maria Santos stood on her back porch, cold lemonade in hand, watching her 3 children, ages 6, 8, and 10, cannonball into their brand new swimming pool with the kind of unbridled joy that only comes from a mother's creative genius meeting a summer heat wave that refused to break. The pool wasn't exactly what you find in a fancy catalog. Maria had spent her weekend transforming their old sandbox into an aquatic wonderland using a heavy-duty tarp, some strategically placed bricks, and a garden hose that had been working overtime since Friday. At 8 feet by 6 feet and 2 feet deep, it was hardly Olympic-sized, but for the Santos kids and half the neighborhood children who'd materialized like heat-seeking missiles, it might as well have been a resort. "Mom, this is the best pool ever," shrieked little Sophia, her dark curls plastered to her head as she executed what she proudly called her mermaid spin. Maria smiled, remembering the crushing disappointment on her children's faces 3 weeks ago when she had to explain that a real pool wasn't in their budget this year. Not after the car repairs, not after the medical bills from Tommy's broken arm, and certainly not with her hours at the diner being cut. But Maria Santos hadn't raised 3 kids as a single mother by accepting defeat easily. The sound of sliding glass doors opening next door made Maria's stomach clench slightly. She didn't need to look to know that Karen Whitmore was emerging from her climate-controlled fortress, probably clutching her phone and wearing that particular expression that suggested someone, somewhere, was about to have their day ruined. Karen Whitmore was the kind of neighbor who knew the exact height regulations for garden gnomes and had memorized the HOA handbook like scripture. Her own backyard was a masterpiece of geometric precision. Manicured hedges, color-coordinated flower beds, and a deck so pristine it looked like a furniture showroom. The contrast with Maria's yard, where toys were scattered like colorful confetti and the grass showed the happy wear patterns of children who actually lived there, couldn't have been more stark. "Excuse me." Karen's voice cut across the joyful chaos like a knife through birthday cake. She stood at the perfectly maintained fence line, her blonde bob unmoving despite the humidity that had turned everyone else into wilted versions of themselves. "What exactly is going on over there?" Maria set down her lemonade and walked toward the fence, her flip-flops squelching slightly on the wet grass. She could feel the weight of the moment, the way her children's laughter had quieted just a notch, the way other neighbors had suddenly found reasons to be in their backyards, phones discreetly positioned. "Just keeping the kids cool, Karen. It's supposed to hit 98 degrees today." Karen's eyes swept over the improvised pool setup with the intensity of a health inspector examining a suspicious restaurant. "That's not a pool, that's a safety hazard. And it's certainly not permitted. Do you have any idea what kind of liability issues this creates? What about drainage? Property values?" The splash of another cannonball punctuated Karen's concerns, followed by Tommy's triumphant, "Did you see that awesome belly flop, Mom?" Maria felt something shift inside her chest, a familiar protective instinct that had gotten her through years of challenges that would have broken lesser spirits. She looked at her neighbor's pinched expression, then back at her children's joy-flushed faces, and made a decision that would change everything. "The kids are having fun, Karen. Nobody's getting hurt, and it's my property." But Karen was already pulling out her phone, her manicured fingers flying across the screen with the efficiency of someone who'd clearly done this before. The war for Maple Street was about to begin. By 7:30 a.m. the next morning, Maria's phone was buzzing like an angry hornet. 3 missed calls from the HOA president, 2 voicemails from someone identifying themselves as code enforcement, and a text from her neighbor, Jim, that simply read, "Heads up, Karen's on the warpath." Maria poured her coffee and peered through her kitchen window at the backyard. The makeshift pool sat innocently in the morning sun, already warming up for another day of childhood bliss. Her kids were still asleep, dreaming of cannonballs and Marco Polo, blissfully unaware that their summer paradise had apparently become ground zero for neighborhood warfare. The first knock came at 8:15 a.m. sharp. "Mrs. Santos." The man at her door wore a polo shirt with the HOA logo and carried a clipboard like a weapon. Behind him stood Karen, dressed as if she were attending a board meeting rather than ruining someone's Tuesday morning. "I'm Brad Kellerman, Homeowners Association Compliance Officer. We need to discuss some irregularities in your backyard setup." Maria's Spanish grandmother used to say that trouble always arrived wearing its Sunday best, and looking at Brad's pressed khakis and Karen's satisfied smirk, she figured Abuela had been right about that too. "What seems to be the problem?" Maria asked, though she already knew the answer was standing behind Brad, practically vibrating with righteous indignation. Brad consulted his clipboard with the gravity of someone reading nuclear launch codes. "We've received multiple complaints about an unpermitted swimming pool installation. The HOA bylaws are very clear about recreational water features requiring advance approval, proper permitting, and safety inspections. Multiple complaints. Maria raised an eyebrow. From how many people exactly? Karen stepped forward, her voice dripping with a kind of fake concern that made Maria's teeth itch. It's not about the number of complaints, Maria. It's about community standards. What if every homeowner decided to just make their own rules? Chaos. Property values would plummet. Maria bit back her first three responses, all of which would have made her children cover their ears. Instead, she smiled the same smile she used on difficult customers at the diner, one that looked pleasant but promised absolutely nothing. It's a kiddie pool made from a tarp, not the Bellagio fountain. But Brad was already scribbling notes, his pen moving with the enthusiasm of someone who finally found his life's purpose. Regardless of construction materials, any water feature exceeding 6 inches in depth requires permits. I'm also seeing potential drainage issues, possible mosquito breeding grounds, and what appears to be. He squinted at his clipboard. Unauthorized landscape modification. The sandbox? Maria's voice climbed an octave. I turned his sandbox into a pool. With a tarp. Karen crossed her arms, her expression suggesting she'd just won the neighborhood lottery. Rules are rules, Maria. I'm sure you understand. This isn't personal. It's about maintaining the integrity of our community. What Karen didn't mention was the phone tree she activated at 6 a.m., calling every AHO board member, the city planning department, and her cousin who worked in code enforcement. She also didn't mention the detailed photos she'd taken from her upstairs window, complete with measurements she estimated using her iPhone app. You have 48 hours to remove the unpermitted installation, Brad announced, tearing off a pink copy of something official-looking. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $100, plus potential legal action. As they walked away, Maria heard Karen's voice carrying on the morning air. I tried to handle this neighborly, but some people just don't understand community responsibility. Maria closed the door and leaned against it, staring at the pink paper in her hands. Behind her, she heard the soft shuffle of small feet on hardwood floors. Mommy? Sophia appeared in her princess pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes. Why are you making that face? Is something wrong with our pool? Maria looked down at her youngest daughter, then at the official notice threatening fines they couldn't afford, then at the backyard where yesterday's joy had been transformed overnight into a municipal crisis. Something was indeed wrong when it wasn't with their pool. No, baby, Maria said, crumpling the pink paper in her fist. Nothing's wrong with our pool, but Mommy needs to make some phone calls. As Sophia padded back to the kitchen for cereal, Maria pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contacts. If Karen wanted to play by the rules, then they'd play by the rules. All of them. Maria's first call was to her cousin Diego, who worked for the city's planning department. Her second was to her friend Janet, who happened to be a paralegal with a specialty in property law and a particular hatred for HOA overreach. By 10 a.m., she had a strategy that would have made her late father, a union organizer who'd never backed down from a fight, proud. Let me get this straight, Janet said, sitting at Maria's kitchen table with a stack of documents and a laptop that had seen better days. Karen Whitmore filed complaints with the HOA, code enforcement, and the city planning office. That's what Diego said. Apparently, she was very thorough. Maria poured more coffee, her hands steadier than they'd been all morning. She wants to play hardball. Fine, but I'm not going down without a fight. Janet's grin was the kind that usually preceded very bad news for someone. Oh, honey, this is about to get interesting. Because if Karen filed official complaints, that means we get to request official inspections. Of everything. At 2 p.m. sharp, Inspector Rodriguez from the city's code enforcement office arrived in his official truck. He was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who'd seen enough neighbor disputes to write a book about human nature. Behind him came Brad from the HOA, looking significantly less confident than he had that morning. Mrs. Santos, I understand you've requested a comprehensive property inspection. Inspector Rodriguez consulted his tablet, which looked far more sophisticated than Brad's clipboard. That's right. If we're going to do this, let's do it properly. I want everything inspected, my property, the pool, all compliance issues, the whole 9 yards. What Maria didn't say was that Janet had discovered something very interesting during her morning research. According to city records, any official complaint triggered the right to request reciprocal inspections of adjacent properties, especially when those complaints involved safety concerns or property values. Inspector Rodriguez spent 45 minutes examining every inch of the Santos backyard. He measured the pool exactly 6 feet by 8 feet, 18 inches deep, tested the water drainage, excellent, flowing to appropriate municipal storm drains, checked for safety hazards, none found, and even examined the property lines. Well, he said, making final notes on his tablet, this is actually quite clever. The depth doesn't trigger permit requirements, drainage is appropriate, and there are no safety violations. It's essentially a large kiddie pool with better engineering. Brad's clipboard seemed to wilt in his hands, but the HOA bylaws clearly state, the HOA bylaws can't supersede city code, Inspector Rodriguez interrupted gently. And according to city regulations, this installation is perfectly legal. As they wrapped up, Maria played her ace card. Inspector Rodriguez, since we're being so thorough about neighborhood compliance, I'd like to request inspections of adjacent properties as well. To make sure everything meets the same high standards. The inspector nodded professionally. That's your right, Mrs. Santos. Any specific concerns? Maria pulled out her phone displaying photos Janet had helped her take that morning. Well, I noticed some potential issues. Unpermitted deck extensions, possible drainage problems, maybe some setback violations. Through her kitchen window, Karen had been watching the inspection with barely concealed glee. But as she saw Maria showing photos to the inspector, and as she watched him make notes while looking directly at her house, her expression began to change. The inspector's truck pulling into Karen's driveway 20 minutes later was visible from half the neighborhood. So was Karen rushing out in her bathrobe and slippers, having been caught completely off guard. From her backyard, where Tommy was doing a victory lap in the pool, Maria could hear raised voices carrying across the fence. Ma'am, we need to discuss some structural modifications that appear to lack proper permits. I don't understand, this is about the Santos property, not mine. Actually, Mrs. Whitmore and Mrs. Santos requested a comprehensive neighborhood compliance review. It's standard procedure when formal complaints are filed. Janet appeared at Maria's elbow, munching on leftover birthday cake and watching the drama unfold with the satisfaction of someone who'd just seen justice served with a side of irony. How did you know? Maria asked quietly. About Karen's unpermitted deck extension, the hot tub that's too close to the property line, the drainage modification that's been redirecting water onto city property. Janet grinned. Honey, I've been watching that woman boss around this neighborhood for 3 years. You think I didn't notice when she added 200 square feet to her deck without pulling permits? The sound of Karen's voice growing increasingly shrill was music to Maria's ears, but it was Sophia's delighted squeal from the pool that really made her smile. Mommy, the water's perfect. Can we invite Emma and Josh over? Absolutely, baby, Maria called back. Invite whoever you want. As Inspector Rodriguez's truck finally pulled away from Karen's house, with Karen standing in her driveway holding what appeared to be a very pink piece of paper, Maria's phone buzzed with a text from Diego. Karen Whitmore, 3 violations, $1,200 in fines, 30 days to comply. Your pool, 0 violations, 0 fines, enjoy your swim. The war for Maple Street had just taken a very interesting turn. By Thursday morning, Maple Street looked like the set of a reality TV show about suburban warfare. Karen's pristine backyard had been invaded by city contractors, their orange cones and caution tape transforming her geometric paradise into a construction zone. The sound of jackhammers breaking up her illegally placed hot tub foundation provided a rather aggressive soundtrack to what should have been another peaceful summer day. Maria sipped her coffee on the back porch, watching her children and half the neighborhood kids splash happily in their perfectly legal pool, while Karen paced her deck like a caged animal, phone pressed to her ear. Yes, I understand there are fines, but surely we can work something out. No, I don't think you understand who I am in this community. What Karen didn't realize was that her morning phone tree campaign had awakened something far more dangerous than city inspectors. She'd awakened the neighbors. It started with Jim from next door, who'd been quietly annoyed about Karen's complaints about his teenage son's basketball hoop for the past 2 years. Then Mrs. Chen from across the street, who'd received a formal HOA citation for her non-conforming garden gnomes. The Johnsons, who'd been hassled about their RV parking. The Paddles, who'd been reported for having too many cars in their driveway during their daughter's wedding celebration. One by one, they began to call the city's inspection hotline. I'd like to report a possible code violation at 1247 Maple Street. By noon, Inspector Rodriguez was back on Maple Street, looking like a man who'd suddenly realized he opened Pandora's box. His truck was followed by another inspector, then another. Soon, Karen's house was swarming with officials carrying clipboards, measuring tapes, and very serious expressions. Janet arrived with lunch and a front-row seat to the chaos. I brought sandwiches and gossiped, she announced, settling into a lawn chair with the enthusiasm of someone attending a particularly good theater performance. What's the latest? Maria asked, though she could guess from the parade of officials traipsing through Karen's yard. Oh, honey, it's beautiful. Turns out when you make enough noise, people start paying attention to everything. The deck extension was just the beginning. They found electrical work without permits, a fence that's 6 inches over the property line, and get this, her precious flower beds are planted on city easement property. Through the fence, they could hear Karen's voice reaching new octaves of indignation. This is harassment. This is a conspiracy. I demand to speak to someone in charge." The irony was lost on no one when Brad from the HOA arrived with his clipboard, looking like he aged 5 years since Monday. He approached Maria's fence with the cautious demeanor of someone approaching a sleeping tiger. "Mrs. Santos, could we perhaps discuss a resolution here?" Maria set down her sandwich and walked over, her flip-flops squelching pleasantly on the wet grass. Behind her, Tommy executed a perfect cannonball that sent water cascading over the edge of their legal, permitted completely up to code swimming pool. "What kind of resolution, Brad?" "Well, perhaps if you were to modify your pool situation, we could work with Mrs. Whitmore on her current challenges." A silence that followed was broken only by the sound of children laughing and the distant drone of Karen arguing with someone from the electrical department. "Let me make sure I understand," Maria said slowly. "You want me to tear down my legal pool to help Karen with her illegal deck?" Brad's clipboard seemed to be getting heavier by the minute. "It's more about community harmony." "You know what would create community harmony?" The voice came from behind him. Mrs. Chen had materialized at her fence line, flanked by Jim and the Johnsons. "If certain people stopped calling the city every time someone sneezes wrong." "Karen reported my Christmas lights in January," Jim added. "January? They weren't even plugged in." "She called code enforcement on our daughter's quinceañera decorations," added Mrs. Patel, appearing at her back door. "Said the piñata was a temporary structure that needed permits." Brad looked around at the gathering crowd of neighbors, all of whom seemed to have suddenly found their voices after years of Karen's reign of HOA terror. His clipboard was definitely getting heavier. "Perhaps," he said weakly, "we should table this discussion until emotions cool down." As Brad retreated, Karen's voice carried across the yard with the desperation of someone watching their carefully constructed world crumble. "You can't do this to me. I'm the president of the garden club. I'd organize the neighborhood watch. I maintain property values." But the neighbors weren't listening anymore. They were too busy admiring Maria's ingenious pool design and asking if their kids could come over for a swim. Inspector Rodriguez approached Maria's fence one last time before loading his truck. "Mrs. Santos, for what it's worth, this is some of the finest improvised engineering I've seen. Your kids are lucky to have such a resourceful mom." As the official vehicles finally departed, leaving Karen's yard looking like a disaster zone, Maria surveyed her kingdom. Her children were teaching half the neighborhood kids how to do synchronized swimming routines. Her perfectly legal pool sparkled in the afternoon sun, and Karen Whitmore was standing in her ruined backyard, holding a stack of pink citation papers and looking like someone who just learned that karma had her phone number. The revolution had begun, and it smelled like chlorine and victory. 3 weeks later, Maple Street had transformed into something resembling an actual neighborhood rather than a suburban prison camp. The sound of children's laughter echoed between houses as kids moved freely from yard to yard, no longer afraid that their fun might trigger another one of Karen's complaint campaigns. Maria's pool had become the unofficial community center. What started as a desperate attempt to keep her kids cool had evolved into something beautiful, a gathering place where neighbors actually talked to each other instead of hiding behind their perfectly maintained facades. "Marco!" shouted Emma from the Chen family. "Polo!" came the chorus from 6 different kids, including Maria's 3, who'd become the unofficial pool ambassadors of Maple Street. Karen's house stood as a monument to the dangers of aggressive rule enforcement. The deck demolition had been completed, leaving behind a significantly smaller outdoor space and a backyard that looked like it was recovering from surgery. The hot tub was gone, the illegal fence had been repositioned, and her beloved flower beds had been relocated to actually legal locations. The final tally: $3,200 in fines, $8,000 in remediation costs, and a reputation in shambles. But the real change wasn't in Karen's yard. It was in Karen herself. Maria first noticed it on a Tuesday morning when she saw Karen actually watering her relocated flowers instead of photographing potential violations from her window. Then again on Thursday when Karen actually waved when Maria drove past. It was a small gesture, barely perceptible, but after months of icy stares, it felt seismic. The breakthrough came on a Friday afternoon when the temperature hit 102 degrees and even the adults were wilting. Maria was refilling the pool when she heard a tentative voice from the fence line. "Maria?" Karen stood at the property line, looking smaller somehow without her usual armor of righteous indignation. She wore simple shorts and a t-shirt instead of her usual battle-ready attire, and her hair was actually showing signs of humidity damage. "Yes?" Karen's voice cracked slightly. "I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually." Maria turned off the hose and walked over, curious but cautious. 3 weeks ago, this woman had tried to destroy her children's summer joy over principle. Trust wouldn't rebuild overnight. "I was wrong," Karen continued, her words coming faster now as if she needed to get them out before she lost her nerve. "About the pool, about the complaints, about everything. I've been so focused on rules and property values that I forgot we're supposed to be neighbors. Through the fence, they could hear the sound of children playing, water splashing, and genuine joy. The sound of a community that was finally functioning. Why? Maria asked simply. Karen's composure cracked, revealing something raw underneath. Because I was scared. My husband left last year, my kids are grown and never visit, and this house, these rules, they were the only things I felt I could control. When I saw your kids having so much fun, saw how creative you were, how everyone gravitated toward your family, I was jealous, and I handled it terribly. A silence stretched between them, filled with the sounds of summer and childhood and the kind of life Karen had forgotten how to live. The thing is, Maria said finally, there's room in that pool for one more if you ever want to cool off. Karen's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for months. I don't think I remember how to just have fun. Lucky for you, Maria smiled. My kids are excellent teachers. That afternoon, for the first time in years, Karen Whitmore got her feet wet. She didn't cannonball, that would come later, much to everyone's surprise and delight. But she sat on the edge of Maria's ingenious pool, feet dangling in the cool water, while Sophia explained the intricate rules of their newest game, Mermaid Princess Adventure Pool. By August, the Sambas pool had hosted 3 birthday parties, 2 neighborhood barbecues, and 1 very successful peace treaty negotiation between the Henderson twins. Karen had contributed a pool noodle and learned to stop flinching every time a child shrieked with joy. The HOA meetings became considerably shorter and significantly less contentious. Rad's clipboard seemed less heavy these days, probably because it wasn't loaded down with Karen's surveillance reports. Property values, interestingly enough, actually improved. Turns out that neighborhoods where people actually like living tend to be more desirable. On the last day of summer, as Maria was finally draining the pool for the season, Karen appeared at the fence one more time. I've been thinking, she said, about next summer. Oh, what if we made it bigger? Maybe got some of the other families involved. I was thinking we could even make it official. You know, get proper permits. Do it right. Maria grinned, remembering her grandmother's words about trouble arriving in Sunday clothes. Sometimes, she thought, redemption showed up the same way. Karen, she said, I think that sounds like a wonderful idea. As the autumn leaves began to fall on Maple Street, they covered a neighborhood that had learned an important lesson. Sometimes the best rules are the ones that make room for joy, and the strongest communities are built not on perfect conformity, but on the understanding that we're all just trying to keep our kids cool, our families happy, and our hearts open to the possibility that even the most difficult neighbors might just be people who've forgotten how to have fun. The pool was gone for the winter, but the community it had created would last much longer. After all, some problems really did have the simplest solutions. You just had to be willing to get a little wet finding them.